Alright, we're going to be solving a system of equation by simply graphing two lines on a coordinate plane. I'm going to do it first by hand, then we'll do it with a calculator, and we're just going to be looking for our point of intersection. So I want you to keep in mind that when we're looking at these equations, in order to graph a system of equations to solve for the solution set, you must have them set in slope-intercept form. And when we say slope-intercept form, we mean that y equals mx plus b. Remember, m is your slope, and b is going to be your y-intercept. Now, when we talk about slope, we're talking about a ratio of the rise over run. So it's rise over run. So keep that in mind. So the easiest way to do this is these have already been solved for y. Notice that y is isolated on one side of the equation. So it's going to be real easy for us to go ahead and plot them. If it gives it to you in standard form, you will have to solve for y to set it in slope-intercept form before you can graph it. So let's go ahead and take a look. On this one, my b is going to be positive 3. So I'm going to go ahead and plot that point. That's an easy point to start from. I always start from the y-intercept, and then I'll go ahead and count my rise over run. Now notice my m is 4, which means that the rise is 4 and the run is 1, because 4 over 1 is equal to 4. So I'm going to go, I could go up 4 and over 1, but in this case, if you look, if I go up 4, 1, 2, 3, there's no 4 to go up, right? So you might be sitting there going, well, how do I go up 4 when there's no 4? So I'm just going to do the inverse of it, or the opposite of it. So I'm going to go down 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to go to the left 1. Now, if you're asking, why did I go to the left instead of going to the right? Well, because 4 is a positive 4. That means my slope from left to right should be slanted upwards, right? Like if I'm walking uphill. If I would have went to the right, it would have given me a negative slope. So just be sure that if you do the opposite, instead of going up 4 and over to the right 1, you just do the opposite, which is down 4 and to the left 1. So now I'm just going to connect my lines. Alright, so there's my first equation. It's out of the way and done. So now I'm going to look at my second one. My second one, my y-intercept is negative 2. So I'm going to go down to negative 2, 1, 2. Put my point, and then notice my slope is negative x. Now, when it says negative x, that means that my m is going to be negative 1 over 1. So my rise and my run is both 1. It is negative, so I'm going to go down 1 over 1. I'm going to put a point right there. And at this point, I think you can even see without me drawing the line where my point of intersection is going to occur. But I'm going to go ahead and draw it out. Alright, so there it goes. So the point at which they intersect, it looks like negative 1 and then down 1, negative 1. So what is my solution set? It is negative 1, negative 1. Now notice it says justify your answer. We can actually justify it by plugging in these values to our equations. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to say y is equal to 4x plus 3. So if my solution set really is negative 1, negative 1, we should have a true statement. So I'm going to plug in my negative 1 for y, plug in my negative 1 for x, plus 3. I'm going to work this out. So 4 times negative 1 gives me a negative 4, plus 3 gives me a negative 1. This one I really just need to bring it down. There's nothing else to do with it. Notice this is a true statement. So my answer is justified. It is correct. You could even plug this solution set into the other equation. It should also be true. So y equals negative x minus 2. So we'll see what we get here. So I'm going to plug in my negative 1 for y, and then minus negative 1 for x. Notice that put in these numbers, whenever you substitute for a variable, you always want to put them in parentheses, because if you didn't put this in parentheses, you might forget to distribute that negative sign. So let's take a look at what we got. So we have negative 1 is equal to a negative times a negative gives you a positive 1 minus 2. And negative 1, 1 minus 2 gives me negative 1. Once again, it's true. So I know that this is correct. Now, one more thing that I wanted to do, because you don't have to do this by hand, but I like to show you by hand. We've practiced it by hand because it is important to know how to do it, especially for you to be ready for college. So the other thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to graph these equations in my calculator. So I'm going to go home, I'm going to go over to graph, and I'm going to zoom this in just a little bit. Alright, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to graph each one of these. So first I'm going to put 4x plus 3. So 4x, hit tab, and then 4x plus 3. So now notice I have my equation in. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to graph it. I'm going to put in the second equation. So we have negative x. So negative x. And then we have minus 2. So minus 2. And if you're sitting there wondering, if you go, Mr. H, why did you put a negative sign in front of the x and then put a minus sign in between the x and the 2? And that's because the first term that you have in your expression will always get the negative sign if it's negative. And then when you have two different terms, right, so we have the x and we have the 2, in between them you'll always use a minus sign. So just keep that in mind. If it's the first term in the expression, put a negative sign. If it's the second one and it's negative, you just put a minus sign. Now that I got this put in, I'm going to hit enter. So we can see where it crosses. Now I don't know about you, but just me looking at it, it's hard for me to tell the point at which it crosses. So there's a couple different ways you could find that. You could hit Control T, and if you hit Control T, notice that it's going to show us both y values and x values. And you could try to go look through the ordered pair and find a ordered pair that they have in common. I think that's the hard way, but it is an option. The easiest thing to do is if you just hit menu, go down to analyze graph, and if you notice right here, it has an option that says intersection. Just hit enter. Now what you have to do is you'll drag your line to the left of the graph and click enter, and then drag it to the right, and as soon as it crosses the intersection, look what it does. It says intersection and it shows you the value -1, -1. You could hit enter again and it'll keep it on there for you. So that's another way that we could have found that our solution set is -1, -1. I think that most of you probably would think it's just much easier to put it in a graphing calculator, but I would recommend that as we're doing things in class, do it by hand as well to get as much practice as you can, and it'll be helpful for you in the future. So that's how you solve a system of equations by graphing.